If you were anything like me, you had a lot of these growing up. And I still have a ton of them, and I love comics. I've always loved comics. And one of the things I really like about comics is the advertising in comics. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at this particular comic, Guy Gardner Warrior number 17 from February of 1994. And what we're going to do is we're going to show you the games you would have bought if you bought every game advertised in this issue. So Clay Fighter is an interesting thing. This came out during the 1990s, obviously, the early 1990s, when everything was getting a fighting game version released. Everything from, I mean, this was after the advent of Street Fighter, so everyone wanted to get in on that action, right? And Interplay had a really clever idea to make a claymation-based fighting game. I think this was a really neat idea. Unfortunately, it just didn't work really well, and I don't know, it's just not really my thing. The game itself is a clever idea, just with a probably not the best execution of things. I do think there's some really neat technological things in play here. Like, the game looks incredible, the graphics are phenomenal, it's legitimately claymation animation throughout the entire thing, and the digitized voices in the game are really good. It's just, as someone who's a bit of a fighting game snob, loving things like Fatal Fury and Street Fighter and Art of Fighting, yeah, I'm just not a big Clay Fighter fan. Although, I think there's some very clever things to be said about the ad, though. Like, having Bad Mr. Frosty squishing Blanca and Chun-Li is pretty cool, and yeah, I mean, it's got the right attitude, right? Like, this is what the 90s were. It was, the early and mid-90s was all about the extreme, all about the attitude, and this game exemplified that. So yeah, cheers to Clay Fighter for trying something different, and for really kind of pulling off something remarkable to make its own mark in the fighting game universe. You know, big cheers to Nintendo for trying out Where in Time as Mario Sandiego here, because Mario's Time Machine, while not a game for me, is at least an effort at edutainment. And I mean, it does things really well. Like, there's definitely some history that you're going to learn here, and I think that's pretty cool. I do like this ad, too. Like, having Mario in a time machine escaping from a T-Rex's mouth, I mean, that's pretty cool, right? I like the copy here as well, because it feels like a headline in a newspaper. Mario's way cool time machine. You can even visit Thomas Edison in his workshop. Sail with Cleopatra in Egypt. It's trying to make this game sound incredibly dramatic and incredibly cool, but really it's a learning adventure, and you're just kind of inputting some stuff. Now, there's definitely some gameplay involved and things like that, but I mean, this is not going to be a challenge to anybody, and it's not something where people are going to be super duper excited for it, but it's a neat game, and it's a neat take on something that Nintendo had never really done before. Mario's Time Machine is, I mean, the headline says it itself. Mario's Time Machine is way cool. Jim Power: The Lost Dimension in 3D is really interesting. Like, the art in this ad is fantastic. Like, this feels like a classic comic book or a classic, like, pulp novel come to life. And the game itself, it's definitely not as good as something like Super Turrican or anything like that, but the game itself is pretty clever. The graphics are stunning. I love the rotation effect on the game. I think it looks incredible. And the gameplay? I mean, other than the one-hit death, it's actually pretty solid. It's pretty fun. This is something I'd never heard of. Like, I remember seeing this ad in comics when I was younger, but I never actually played it or never really clued in that it was going to be anything worth a damn, but it's actually pretty cool. I really like this game, and I really think it's kind of neat that we got an NES release from Pico Interactive, as well as the Genesis release in 2021. Like, and even cooler, looking at the ad now, this apparently shipped with 3D glasses to be the only true 3D game. Like, that's really clever. While straight up, I think the gameplay in Best of the Best Championship Karate is a pile of hot garbage, to be nice. There is some very, very clever stuff at play here. You're able to create your own character. Being able to select your own style and having a bunch of different moves is really cool. And it's, I think, points for innovation here for trying something different in the fighting game space. I mean, it doesn't land anything. It's awful. But it tried something new. It tried to make a more realistic fighting game rather than just kind of the flashy, bright, and crazy stuff like Street Fighter or, you know, like we saw earlier with Clay Fighter. And cheers to this one as well for actually using the Sega Activator, the motion controller. It's a really neat idea that never really quite connects. Like, it's a very ambitious title and it's a very ambitious idea for what a game is, but it never really gets there. Best of the Best, it isn't the best of anything. It's just a very subpar fighting game with some really solid animations and some really neat ideas. Okay, I'll be honest with you, this is the most exciting part of this entire video, and if you're wondering why I am excited about Asterix the Gaul being featured in this comic, it's because this is a game that was featured in a comic printed in the United States that never released in the US. This game was PAL exclusive. Now, we did have prototypes eventually released online for the Game Boy, but I have not found any prototypes for the SNES or the NES versions of this game. And I am really excited about that because why would this be featured in a US comic if the plan wasn't to initially bring these over? I guess it just never really happened. I love the Asterix comics. I've featured Asterix and Obelix on other videos in the past, and this one here is just a really neat platformer for all three systems. The NES and the Game Boy games, while looking completely different, play almost identically. Like, it's almost an identical level setup, down to the point where you actually have to launch yourself by launching a rock up in the air to launch you over the edge of the map to move you on to the next stage. It's really interesting to be that one-to-one to me. The SNES version is a lot different. It looks a hell of a lot better, obviously, and the sound is definitely better, but the level itself is completely different. You're able to go up much higher and much farther in the level and down further as well. This is so exciting to me to get something advertised in a comic that never released in the States. I am already a fan of Asterix. It is one of the most influential comics ever released, and to have this advertised in Guy Gardner in 1993 is so weird to me that we never actually had a physical release for these games in the States. This is just buried treasure for me because I didn't plan on this. I didn't anticipate this. When I saw the Asterix ad, I was like, well, that's neat. I love Asterix. We'll do this issue. And in doing research for this video, finding out that this never released in the States just kind of blows my mind. I love stuff like this. This is incredible. Oh boy, in the pantheon of video games that never needed to be made, everything Cliffhanger is on that list because none of these are very good. So both the SNES and the Genesis versions are basically the same beat 'em up. There's slight differences between the two of them. Like, I think there's some graphical improvements on the Genesis and there's some sound improvements on the SNES, but at the end of the day, it is the most vanilla, boring, run-of-the-mill beat 'em up that you're ever going to play. And the NES and the Game Gear versions are also very similar. The NES looks significantly worse than the Game Gear version. I will say that. The Game Gear version actually looks pretty good for what it is. But they're basically the same game. They play identically. The level layouts are the same. Neither one of these iterations, either the 8-bit or the 16-bit versions, are terribly good. But you're going to find that if you had bought this when the game released, you would have had something pretty valuable on your hands in the NES version of Cliffhanger, because loose, it's worth $110 right now. And if you had kept it sealed, you'd be $1,000 because it's worth $1,070. This ad is pretty ridiculous. Like, people falling off the cliff and Sly saying, "I hope they don't hit my Jeep." It's absolutely ridiculous. But you know what? It's a lot of fun. This is a ridiculous movie. It was a terrible movie. It made for a terrible game. And yeah, it's just, I think you can see how seriously they took this based on how bad the ad is. And finally, we come to the back cover ad, and that is for T2 Terminator 2 Judgment Day, the game. And the SNES and the Genesis versions need to be very thankful that the Game Gear version exists, because holy cow, do those two versions suck. So let's talk about them first of all. The mechanics in the game are awful. You throw tiny little punches, you have itty-bitty little kicks, you have a terrible hit detection. It's so bad. Like, this is one of the worst games I've ever played. It is just atrocious. You don't really know what to do. You just kind of wander about and beat up some bikers in the first level, and there's objectives that you're supposed to complete, but I don't know how to do them. I don't know how to find these objectives. I don't know what to do. Mercifully, the Game Gear version exists, and the Game Gear version is a classic side-scrolling platformer. It feels a little bit like Russian Attack, not gonna lie. And it plays really well. The hit detection is solid, the graphics are good, the sound is excellent. You don't really feel like you're playing as the Terminator because, I mean, you take a lot of damage and stuff like that, but it actually plays really, really well. I love this ad. You know, something just as simple as kick some liquid metal butt is fantastic, and showing the blown up T-1000 in the background of the smelting plant is just so visceral and so cool to see. Like, this is a wonderful, wonderful ad for an unfortunately 66% terrible set of games here, because boy, without that Game Gear version, this would just be a complete and utter failure. So you have it, every game you would have bought if you bought everything in Guy Gardner Warrior #17. Let me know what you think. We're going to be looking at another comic next month, probably something from Marvel. I'm thinking maybe something in the X-Men variety. Hit like, hit subscribe if you dig the work, thanks to my patrons who you're seeing on screen right now. And remember to play more games, stay square, and take care. I'll talk to you soon.